Good morning. Now we are going to discuss some examples with regard to structured query language. Here, suppose that we have two tables, instructor table and course teachers table. That means this is the details of instructor. Details are they are the instructors and instructor ID, name. Good morning. Today we are going to discuss some examples regarding or with respect to structured query language or SQL. Here we have an instructor table. In the instructor table, this is the ID of instructor ID, name of the instructor, the department which he belongs, and the yearly salary. Here we have teachers means he is teaching this instructor having this ID is taking this course. That means course details are there. That means that belongs to this is the course ID and that belongs to this semester and year in which he has taken or he had taken this subject. Okay. Now suppose that you want to retrieve the names of all instructors who have taught some course and course ID. That means if this instructor took some course, then definitely an entry will be here, and we have to display the names and the course ID. Course ID. That means find the names of all instructors who have taught some course and course ID, and the instructors who taught some subject, their reports will be there in this table. So you have to find out instructor IDs whose details are entered into teachers table. Suppose that you have another instructor who joined and he is not having an entry here. Here all the instructors have entries here, but suppose that an instructor who joined now and he has an entry here, and suppose that he is not taking any subjects, and then his entry will not be there in this teachers table. Okay. Now if he teaches or taught some subject, his name and the course which he had taken, that has to be displayed, course ID. So for that, as we have discussed, we are going to have a select statement. Select, you have, suppose that if you are taking the cross product of these two, then this ID and this ID has having the same attribute name. So you should have to distinguish between this and this. This is instructor.id and this is teachers.id. And all other attributes are different. So select something from, you are going to have a Cartesian product. For that you have to have from instructor table and which table? Teachers. Then definitely instructor table and teachers table will be cross multiplied, or the cross product of instructor and teachers is taken, and from that if you have an entry here, then definitely you have to take the name from name of the, that means if you have an ID which is in teachers and that ID also there in instructor table, that tuples has to be selected, and from that tuple you have to extract name and course ID. Okay, that means if you are taking the cross product of instructor and teachers, what will happen? The new table will be having 4 plus 4. How many? 8 attributes will be there, and ID is having the same attribute name. So to distinguish between this ID and this ID, this is instructor.id and this is teachers.id. So you have a total of 8 attributes. Those are instructor.id, name, department name, salary, teachers.id, course ID, semester and year. So here we have 5 entries and here we have 6 entries. So when you are cross multiplying or it is not cross multiplying, if you are taking the cross product, then the new table will be having 8 attributes and 30 tuples. So from that 30 tuples, you can select those tuples which is having instructor.id equal to teachers.id, because if you want, that means when you are cross multiplying, I want the first row of this table will be multiplied by all these. So in that case, the valid ones are when this is multiplied by this, or when you are multiplying this by this, then the entry will be 101 Srinivas this and this. Okay, in that case, definitely this ID and this ID are same. In that case, you can extract this course ID and name. Next case, when you are multiplying this with this, again 10101 and 10101, that means both IDs are same. So in that case, CS208 and Srinivas, both of them can be retrieved. But when you are multiplying or multiplying this row with this ID and this ID are different, so there is no significance for that. When you are multiplying this and this, that means teachers.id and instructor.id should be the same if you want to retrieve the name and course ID of that tuple. So here the command is select instructor teachers. That means instructor and teachers are the cross product of instructor and teachers has taken, and from that you have to extract. That means select from where instructor dot id equal to what, teachers dot id. Instructor dot id equal to teachers dot id means those tuples which is that means if you take the cross product, then all entries will be, that means 30 tuples has to be selected, and in those 30 tuples they are valid only if teachers.id equal to instructor.id. So those tuples are selected. That means here how many tuples will be there? 101 Srinivas, 101 CST 401, 10101 Srinivas, 10101 CST 208. That those two are having this ID and this ID same. Now 12121 Einstein, 12121 ME 403. That's also selected. 15151 Hobart, 15151 EE 413, 23231 James, 23231 CS 201, 26272 Vishnu, 26272 ME 407. These are the, so you have a total of 6 tuples. That means when you are depending on this, that means this is the predicate, this is the predicate, and if you have applied this predicate to the cross product of this, 6 of them are selected, 6 tuples are selected. From that table you have to extract what, name and course ID. That means select name comma course ID. Select name and course ID from the cross product of instructor and teachers, where instructor.id equal to teachers.id, and this will return what? That means this will return, that means this again, that will return a table, and that table will be having these two. That means select this and this. Those are the attributes, name and course ID from instructor teachers, where instructor.id equal to teachers.id. That means name is equal to Srinivas. Again the course is CS 401. Again Srinivas, CS T208. Then next is Einstein, which is of course ME 403. Then 15 Hobart, Hobart, and he teaches 15151 E413. E413. Next is James. James CS201. CS201. And finally Vishnu ME407. So this is the relation, or this is the table returned by this. That means here when we are going back to our relational algebra, you can have you have to take the natural join of these two, or equijoin. That means natural join of these two means if you take the join of from instructor comma teachers, here you are taking the Cartesian product. Instead of this, can have what is this? This is the natural join. When you are taking the natural join of these two, definitely this class no need to have this. No need to have this. Why? When you are taking the natural join or equijoin, this is called natural join, or within brackets equijoin. Here, when you are cross multiplying this, that means first of all you are going to have a cross multiplication, and from that, here see ID, name, department name and salary are the attributes of this, and ID, course ID and semester and year are the attributes of this table. Here common attributes, here only we have only one common attribute ID, and this is having ID. So if you have one common attribute, here we have a total of how many? 4 plus 4, 8. So instructor.id and teachers.id will be there. But when you are taking the equijoin or join of these two, what will happen? The new table will be having only a single ID attribute. That means the name, department name and salary will be there, course ID, semester and year will be there, but ID of this and ID of this are merged, or instead of instructor.id and teachers.id, it is going to keep only a single one, where instructor.id equal to teachers.id. That means after taking the Cartesian product of these two, those tuples which are having instructor.id equal to teachers.id will be preserved. That means both of them are equal. Then you are going to delete one attribute, and the common attribute is renamed as id, not instructor.id or teachers.id. So when you are doing that, there is no possibility of what? Here select name, course ID from instructor comma teachers, where instructor.id equal to teachers.id can be replaced by select name, course ID from instructor, equijoin, teachers. This is equijoin or natural join. If you have two common attributes, for example, suppose that department name is also here, what will happen? It will keep those tuples which are having instructor.id equal to teachers.id and instructor.department equal to teachers.department name. That means all the common attributes, instead of having two attributes, one, if you are taking the cross product of these two, then here we have only one common attribute. So in the resulting, after the equijoin operation, we are going to preserve, or we are going to keep only one attribute instead of these two. Suppose that we are having two attributes common, two attributes belong to instructor and two attributes belong to teachers. Then